Hey guys, it's me, Rhoku, back with some more League of Legends content. I've spent a lot of time in the past breaking down the gameplay of lower ranked players in order to help them improve at the game since I am a coach. Now, while analyzing these guys' gameplay, I've noticed that a lot of players make the very same types of mistakes in their gameplay. And in some cases, they have the exact same errors from player to player, and these are players from different ranks that play different champions, and in some cases, play different roles. So in this video, we're going to get right into top 10 most common mistakes that I see in League gameplay that you probably make. Let me know in the comment section down below how many of these mistakes that you make, and whether or not this video helped you. Before we get into the video, I'd like to very first mention that for October this month, I am running a bootcamp. So if you want to get involved, I'll leave all the information on the screen, the description, and also the pinned comment. And as mentioned before, I am a coach, so if you want to get coached by me, head on over to my website. I'm going to start off with a mistake that sounds very simple on paper, but it's actually something that plagues every single League player out there, and that is not knowing what every champion does. Now stay with me for a second. Think of the last time that you fought a champion and lost, not because they outplayed you, but because they used a skill, an ability, a technique, a combo, or even built an item that you did not know about or you did not expect. This happens more commonly than you think, and the next time it happens, I want you to pay attention and notice that it's a knowledge issue. You just did not know what that champion could do. It does not take a genius to figure out that your chances of winning against a champion gets drastically lower when you don't know everything that they're capable of. So next time you get beaten by a knowledge issue, instead of just shrugging it off and continuing by your day, take a minute or two after the game to look that champion up in the wikia, so that the next time you face them, you can fight them way better. The next mistake is bad builds and bad runes. I get sent a ton of OPGG pages to review where I am encountered by a lot of messed up builds and rune choices. I don't have to tell you guys that you shouldn't experiment with runes that no one's ever used, because you're most likely going to be destroying your chances of winning. Just stick to what the best players have figured out is best for that champion. But aside from that, there's also another big mistake that is a little bit more difficult to detect, and that is players choosing their builds and runes before the game even starts, before champion select. A lot of players ask me questions about builds like, "Hey Rhoku, what do you think of this 5-item build?" And that question is in itself wrong, because builds aren't supposed to be something that you think about before you know what you're up against. When you get into champ select, and when every single enemy champion is picked, you're supposed to think of a rune page to use, on the spot, and a build to use, and your build can change in the middle of the game. League of Legends is not like baking a cake. You don't get a list of recipes and follow them to the T exactly every single time. Things change in-game. Maybe they have a full AP team, but the one AD character they have is the most fed guy possible, and everybody else is just inting. That means that you no longer need to build MR, you gotta build armor. This is just one example of your build being dynamically changed in the middle of the game. So don't stick to one exact build and rune page for every single game, but have a range of builds and a range of rune pages that you can swap in and out of depending on the match. Even the most general build might work in 50 to 60% of all games, but you're still leaving that 40% of games where your build is completely inappropriate and not effective. The absolute best thing that you can do is know what every single rune and item does, when they're the best, who they're the best against, and then in the middle of the game or in champ select, set your runes and choose your build as the game goes on. This will make your build dynamic, fluid, and you'll be ready to take on every single match. The next common mistake I'm going to talk about is closing the game out. This isn't a mistake with just one or two players, but the entire team in general. What basically happens is that throughout the course of a game, the winning team, instead of going for objectives at the end of the game, they go for kills, 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 more team fights, and if they happen to win a team fight around the enemy team's base, they might end the game. What you gotta do when playing League is understand that the game is not about fighting the enemy champion, it's about getting objectives. Dragons are objectives, turrets are objectives, barons are objectives. Every single minion is an objective of its own. You're just contesting those objectives with the enemy champion. The enemy champion is not the goal, the objectives are. So when you get kills, you're essentially removing the enemy champion from standing in your way between you and an objective. So next time you win a big team fight in mid lane, how about you go for the Baron, or a turret, or a dragon, whatever. Focus on the objectives, because once you get objectives, the game naturally closes itself out, because it's very clear what you gotta do with Baron, it's very clear that when you get the Dragon Soul, your team fights get better, etc, etc, etc. And if your team does not listen, you might want to use your pings and communication to steer them in the right direction, and maybe even start the Baron on your own, because as we all know, monkey see, monkey do. The most common macro issue that I see in low elo teams is overstaying. Now this happens when you win a team fight close to the enemy team's base, but you don't exactly have the means to finish the game off and kill the nexus. You either don't have the minion wave, you haven't killed the entire enemy team, just some of them. For some reason, you can't end the game. Now at this point, the correct thing to do is to retreat, and use all that gold your team has generated from winning those fights and getting those objectives to go for another successful fight and end the game at that point. However, low elo teams will keep fighting, keep pushing, keep forcing aggressive situations to end the game, but will just basically set themselves up to get wiped by the enemy team because the enemy team is closer to their base, they're respawning, they're getting more items, they're spending their gold, they are having their abilities up. So what happens is you're constantly pushing at the Nexus turrets, and then the enemy respawns and kills all of you. This is especially an issue when you retreat, but you do it way too late. So mobile champions especially can chase through your entire team, killing everyone. The simplest way to avoid overstaying is when you get into these kinds of scenarios, ask yourself, can we get these objectives? Can I take this turret without dying? Can we get these turrets without dying? Can we stay here and escape in time before the enemy team respawns and chases us down? Ask these questions to yourself, come with a decision, and then lead your team by example. Another mistake that I see very often, that often causes solo laners to lose entire games, is terrible roams. Now what do I mean by a terrible roam? A terrible roam, generally speaking, is a roam that 1. Accomplishes nothing, you don't get kills, you don't get objectives, and 2. Your wave is set up in such a position that you're losing more minions than the enemy. Every single minion is gold and XP, so as a solo laner, your natural state in the game should be farming. Any second you don't spend farming should be spent doing something that's worthwhile. So if you're not getting kills, and you're not farming, you're wasting time, and the game is going to scale on without you. Worse yet, if you're not farming, but your enemy laner is farming, then they're going to get a lead on you, or you're going to lose the lead that you've gotten on them by getting a solo kill or two. In order to avoid terrible roams, stick to these rules. Number 1, make sure your wave is set up properly. Is your minion wave pushing into the enemy? If this is the case, then you're going to lose more minions than the enemy. Is the enemy minion wave pushed to your turret? Because again, your turret's going to kill the enemy minions and force you to lose more minions. Before you go for a roam, try your best to push the entire minion wave into the enemy turret. This way, the enemy is going to lose far more gold and XP than you. As for picking right roams, you generally want to roam when 1, a fight is definitely going to happen at the point you're going to roam, for example, a dragon or a baron, and 2, you are required to win that fight. Because if you're roaming, but your entire team is super fed, then you don't need to be there because your team is going to win it anyway. Or worse yet, if your entire team is behind and you're roaming, then you really shouldn't because your team is going to lose that fight with or without you. So try to pick your roams carefully. Now, as a lower rank player, if you don't have the macro to pick roams properly, just stick to your lane for the vast majority of the game, only roaming when you have to get to major objectives. Fun fact, minions do damage. Now I know you probably know this already, but are you paying attention to it in the middle of fights? Because the next common mistake is players not paying attention to minions. Minions do a ton of damage when they're grouped up, especially in the early game. So when you're going for earlier fights, try to pay attention to just how many minions will be around you to damage you, or even to damage your enemy. If you're in a losing position, stacking up a massive minion wave might give you the edge you need to get a kill or two and snowball the lane. Vice versa, If you're fighting an enemy that's weaker than you, but they have a massive minion wave, then you're probably gonna lose. Because they have a lot more minions than you, and a big minion wave can mean up to 100 or 200 damage you're taking per second. Now keep in mind that later on in the game, minions matter way less because champions have more stats, more wave clear, more lifesteal, etc. But this is a very important factor to focus on earlier on in the game. Recalls are all over the place in low elo. Many recall too frequently to the point where they're missing out on a ton of gold and XP through minions. Many recall too little, meaning that they're going to walk around the map with thousands of gold without spending it. This is so bad because it doesn't matter how many kills you get, because if you don't spend that gold, you're technically not fed. There are two things to keep in mind when you're trying to recall. Number one, do you have something important to buy? Can you finish an item? Can you get a legendary or an epic item that will change how you're playing the game? Is there a stat that you need desperately, like MR or armor, that you have to get right now? Think of this. If there's something you can buy that's going to change the gameplay in a way where you're going to be able to pop off more, then a recall is probably worth it. And number two, keep in mind I said and, not or. You don't lose a lot of resources by recalling. What do I mean by this? If the enemy crashes a wave into your turret, and you recall here, you're going to lose all those minions. But if you crash a wave into the enemy turret, and then recall, then you're not going to lose practically anything, because by the time you get back to lane, the enemy will have pushed the wave into your turret, and you'll be there to pick up everything. Now, there are exceptions to this. If you took a horrible trade, and you're at the risk of being dove, then technically recalling is better, because not recalling is going to lead to you dying and losing way more than had you just recalled. So, in conclusion, keep those two rules in mind, while also keeping in mind that sometimes it's better to give things up and recall instead of staying and dying. A lot of low elo players do not pay attention to vision. Believe me when I say this, that a lot of low elo players put down wards for the sake of putting down wards. I know it sounds crazy, but wards are there to give you information of what's happening in that area. It's giving you vision, but a lot of players will put the wards down and never look at them again for the rest of the game or until the rest of that ward's lifespan. It's important to understand that a ward is a means to an end. It's a tool to give you information about who is in that area and sometimes, more importantly, who's not in that area. This can help you understand what kind of plays you can go for and what kind of plays you cannot go for, depending on who's around you when you're trying to go for it. Also, if you don't have vision around an area, then you might have to think twice about going for a specific kind of play. Let's say you're up against a Blitzcrank, and the enemy team is doing Baron. If you don't have vision on where Blitzcrank is, then walking into bushes and stuff is going to be really risky because you're essentially making it so that the Blitzcrank, if he's camping somewhere, has a perfect hook on you. The same can go for champions like the camp in bushes. Have you ever been one-shot by a Ganon from a random bush? Well, this is why. You don't have vision on him or the area around him. So you can just walk into a random bush, sit there, and if you don't have vision, you'll just get one shot by him. So pay attention to vision that you yourself have placed, vision that your teammates have placed, and vision that you do not have. Think about where each enemy champion is, what they're capable of, and how far up your face they can be without you not knowing about it since you don't have vision. If you're careful about vision, you won't get cheesed by anyone. Our next mistake is low elo players not being able to work with their teammates. I know, crazy thought, but League of Legends is a team game. You have to work with your teammates in order to win the game. A lot of low elo players are not aware of where their teammates are on the map at a given point in time. This leads to them going for crazy plays alone that in isolation might be pretty sick or impressive, but because their teammates are not there to follow up, that play was completely stupid because they just inted. This goes for you hitting some sort of sick ultimate on some CC champion, but then your team is nowhere to be found, so you just get one shot. You have to understand where your teammates are and plan your plays according to where they are. Another tip is communication. In a lot of cases, you might know the correct play, but because you don't communicate it to your team, they can't follow through, so the right play turns into a very poorly executed play that leads your entire team losing. it's very important to use your pings to communicate with your team and organize tactics and strategies. You need to go for Baron? Ping it. Get everyone's attention. Do you not have prio to help out your jungler? Ping them back. Make sure they know that you're not ready to help them out. A lot of issues in the game can be completely solved if everybody communicated with each other way more clearly. Last, but definitely not the least, tilt. Everyone gets tilted. I get tilted. You get tilted. Your grandma gets tilted. Everyone. So it's very important for us to know ways in which we can cope with tilt or just anger and stress in general. I personally have defined tilt as a state of mind in-game where you've stopped thinking about things that are in your control and are starting to pay attention to things that are not in your control. What do I mean by this? So instead of thinking about what kind of things you can do in lane, what kind of combos you can do, how you can win the game, you start thinking about, oh, the enemy team is smurfing, my teammates are bad, my teammates have horrible builds, Riot Games is so bad at balancing, these champions are broken. All these things they can potentially tilt and get triggered about are things that are crucially not in your control. And when you pay attention to things that are not in your control, you're not going to be doing the things properly that are in your control in terms of your gameplay, your leadership, etc. So instead of paying attention to all these things that are bad and negative, try to keep your eyes on the prize, which is winning the game. What happened, happened. That's in the past. What can I do right now with what tools we're given, what information we're given, to make the best of our situation and have the highest chance of winning this game? Only through true mental calmness can you win the game and destroy the enemy opponent, because in League of Legends, the first player to tilt will be the first player to lose, because guess what? When one player on the enemy team is tilted, they'll type their teammates and tilt the entire team so they're all not thinking about the game, letting you close it out and destroy everyone. So stay calm and win the mental battle. Anyway guys, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys got a lot of use out of this. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.